Hi, Tony here again with all the remote things. It's great to have you, and I've got a great guest this week, Jeff Gothelf. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me, Tony. It's good to be here.
Yeah, it was fantastic, and it took us a little bit to get it organised, but it's fantastic to have you here. Jeff, just for those that may not know you, I'd love you to introduce yourself.
Sure. So my name is Jeff Gothelf. These days, I work as a teacher, a trainer, a speaker, and a coach slash consultant on all things product management, OKRs, lean UX, and organizational agility. I've spent the bulk of my career in UX and product management and then entrepreneurial ventures as well. And then over the course of that 20 plus year career, I've written a few books. My first book was Lean UX. As always, with kind of everyone's debut album, it's by far the most successful one. But I co-wrote that with Josh Seiden. We also wrote a book called Sense and Respond together, which I'm very proud of. Wrote a book called Lean versus Agile versus Design Thinking, and then another short book called Forever Employable, which I think we're going to touch on during this conversation as well. And that's pretty much me in a nutshell.
Yeah, great. And I must say, I obviously I do gravitate lean UX. I read that as many people do when you first brought that out. But sense and respond was always the text for me that I always lean on. And even today, when I'm talking to product owners and working with that kind of thing, sense and respond to me is that essential thing that they need to read and take into account. So I thank you for writing that book because it's been a great aid to me over the many years, and I'm sure I'm not the only one, Jeff. Um, we're going to start off with a little bit of a difference. So everybody will be expecting me to talk about that stuff, and I'm not going to do that today. I'm going to take a little bit of a change. What I want to ask you or talk to you about is the buzzword of today, and I hear this in so many organisations is that we got to have a product strategy.
Mm.
What's your product strategy? And I'd love to hear your take on what a product strategy is and how it should be done, or if at all.
Absolutely. It's so interesting to me, by the way, because I work with teams on a regular basis who simply can't articulate their product strategy. And I think there's two reasons for that, and there are contradictory reasons. One is they don't have one. That's one, and that's very common. It's more common than you would think, and it's kind of terrifying if you ask me. The other is that it's too complicated for them to either understand or repeat back in a clear manner. And I think part of that is because there's so much effort that goes into the product strategy process and then ultimately the planning that comes out of that. So strategy is not a plan, but so much effort goes into defining the strategy and then the plan that comes out of it that it takes on much less of a strategy and much more of a very prescriptive, rigid roadmap, if you will. So that's what things are. That's what the case is today, at least with an overwhelming majority of the folks that I work with. So just speaking from my direct experience, as if you've read my material, I know you have, I subscribe to a much more lean approach to these types of things. And my favorite definition of product strategy comes from Roger Martin's HBR article from 2014 called The Big Lie of Strategic Planning. And in that article, he talks about strategy as hypothesis and strategy as essentially the answers to two questions. The questions are, where will you play and how will you win? So you can boil down, if you can boil your strategy conversation down to those two questions and then answer those two questions in a way that create a hypothesis, you can then move forward quickly to then test and learn whether or not your strategy is correct. And so if we think about those two questions, where will you play is asking you to define the market or the industry or the vertical that you intend on targeting. We're going to play, where will we play? We're playing with, cross-border micro financial transactions in sub-Saharan Africa, right? That's where we'll play, something like that. Or we're focused on mid-tier fashion retail in North America, something like that, right? And then how will you win is not so much a question if it will win by building an app that can do these three things. That's not it. How will you win is essentially like, what problem are you going to solve, right? We're going to make micropayments in sub-Saharan Africa the most frictionless and cheapest that they can be, something along those lines. That's how we will win. Those are the two things that I think define that. I want to say one more thing on this, though. I actually wrote a blog post about this recently, where I took Martin's 2 questions and I added three other questions to it for a total of 5. So if you feel like 2 questions is too lean, you can use 5 questions. And so, first question, where will you play? We talked about that. The second is, what problem are you solving? So if we're defining this space, right, with micropayments in sub-Saharan Africa, what problem are we solving there? Well, we're solving that today. It's high friction, high cost, difficult to use. Okay. Third question, who are you solving the problem for, right? Which specific set of humans are you trying to help? 4 is, how will you win? And then the 5th one, and this probably leads to some conversations later on for us, is how will you know you have won? So if you solve the problem and you achieve the strategy, what will people be doing differently, right? What are the outcomes that you're trying to achieve? And there's a blog post about this on my blog. But that was a very long-winded answer about a very lean approach to product strategy. I hope that helps.
Well, it's a big topic. So the interesting thing that I'm interested there to hear from you is, does that differ if it's an existing organization who literally, because the amount of existing organizations, whether they be big or small, that don't actually have a product strategy, which is quite amazing, does that differ from a startup?
I mean, look, the lack of a product strategy, it isn't different. I think the interesting thing is that in a startup, you are usually working towards one person's very strongly held opinion or vision about where you're going. And so at the very least, if you have a clarifying question, you know who to go to, and that someone, the founder, is going to give you a very direct answer about that. You may agree, you may disagree. It may not be an answer framed in strategy, but rather more in, we're building X, go build X. That's why I hired you. Which I think in a much larger organization becomes a more difficult question to answer, because if you don't know what the product strategy is, there's a good chance that your boss doesn't know. And then really trying to kind of work your way up the ladder can be risky. Number one, you might be kind of going over people's heads and asking uncomfortable questions that they should know the answer to, but probably don't. Or you may actually discover that the emperor has no clothes, right? And that there is no product strategy. And really the strategy is like, make more money, right? Every company has that goal, right? But that's not a strategy. And so I think that's the fundamental difference. I think in a startup, you at least know who to go to ask this question. I think in a large organization, it's hard and riskier to figure this out and to ask this question.
And I see that quite often, and I've actually been challenged with the question, well, why do I need a product strategy? We're doing fine.
Yeah. We're doing fine. Yeah.
So what's your answer to that, Jeff? I'm interested.
Well, again, I think we need to know, like, we're doing fine means, I mean, if we're doing fine, we've got a strategy. Maybe it hasn't been articulated yet. Can we get it said out loud so that we can build alignment, right? The nice thing about product strategy is that it functions as a filter, right? We've heard there's an infinite amount of content about prioritization, right? It's a hell yes or it's a no, right? You've heard that a million times from a bunch of different people. But prioritization continues to plague teams in every organization. With a clearly articulated and understood and transparent product strategy, we now have a filter for the work, right? So regardless of who comes up with an idea, they may say, hey, team, go build this thing, right? I saw it on my kids. My kid's been using this app. I love it. I want to add it to our app, right? That's never happened. And you're like, okay, boss, but listen, our product strategy is to improve, to reduce the friction in micropayments in sub-Saharan Africa, right? So how does adding sports news to our app, make that better? right? So you've got this filter that at least allows you to ask the question objectively. I think a lot of folks find themselves in a situation where they're challenging a superior's opinion, a hippo, a highly paid person's opinion, or a founder, a CEO, an executive, a stakeholder, whatever it is, in a what comes across as a subjective way, right? We don't want to do this. We don't think this is a good idea. If you have a clearly articulated product strategy, you can position your objection to a piece of work objectively. Please help me understand how adding sports news and weather to our micropayments app is going to help us achieve a reduced friction in this process in sub-Saharan Africa, right? And if they can produce a good answer to that, terrific, right? Maybe that's why they're the boss, right? But it's a nice way to frame constraints, guardrails to the work, and a nice filter to your backlog that says, we're only going to let things potentially into the backlog that we believe help us achieve the strategy.
So if I take that whole strategy thought and then we play it into another buzzword, but this is one that people talk to you a lot about, right? And it has become a very powerful mechanism, which is OKRs. And I know a lot of people talk to you about OKRs, and you do a lot of talks on OKRs. So I'm going to ask some different questions, hopefully here, than you've been hit with before, or at least you've probably thought about them before, right? So what I see now, OKRs, everybody knows the strategic intent, and it links to your delivery if you're doing it right. What I'm seeing though now is there's a number of things being done with OKRs that probably they were never invented for. And they become at odds with your product strategy. They become at odds with the actual strategic intent. So one of those I want to ask you about is, I'm seeing this from some very large consultancies, where they're actually linking the work. So a feature becomes the key result.
Yeah.
The epic becomes the key result, or even down to the story level becoming the key result. I'd like to talk to you about that, because that seems to me, that's an output, not an outcome. So your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, look, so let's talk about outputs and outcomes, and then we'll talk about why this happens, right? Outputs are the things that we make: features, services, products, campaigns, initiatives, projects, etc. Outcomes are the behavior changes that we see in the people who consume the thing that we make, right? So what are people doing differently now that I've put this output into the world? That's an outcome, okay? Managing the outputs is easy. It's binary, right? Did you make the thing, right? Did you ship the app? Did you ship the system? Did you build the product? It's literally a binary thing. And so, yes, we did. No, we didn't. Very easy to measure, easy to manage, and we're used to it. And oh, by the way, we've got 100 years of historical inertia pushing us down this path, right? It's complete. It's derivative of manufacturing, right? Manufacturing is measured in production. Did you make a thing? Did you make more of the thing? Did you reduce the cost of making the thing? That makes sense in manufacturing. It does not make sense in software production, right? Especially in 2023, right? Where every business is a software business. It's built on top of a software layer. And the software that we build today is continuous, right? When you and I started working in technology, software came in a box,
Yeah.
right? You went to the store and you bought a box of software. And so there was still some remnants of manufacturing that made sense, because at some point you had to stop working on the thing. You had to duplicate it. I worked at America Online. We duplicated it 15 million times. Yeah. And then you ship it. You ship it to people, or you ship it to stores. Today we build continuous systems. And so you don't go and buy a box of Netflix, right? It sounds ridiculous. Right? No one goes out and buys a box of Amazon or a case of Instagram, right? Something like that. It doesn't make any sense. And so the the reality of the systems that we build today is that they're continuous. And the fact is that the systems exist, not all companies employ them, but the systems exist that allow us to launch features to production as fast as we want. Literally, Amazon pushes code to production every second, right? That's a fact. 60 times a minute. So the deployment of features is a non-event, right? I don't know if you remember this. Like we used to have parties when we deployed features.
When we deployed features, or when we did a deploy, everybody would be ringing the bell, and there'd be
you ring the bell, you get a T-shirt, you have a party, maybe you take the weekend off, right? It's an impossible thing to do today.
Yeah.
Right. And so this idea that we measure the productivity or the success of our software based on the deployment of features doesn't make sense anymore. Given that pace, given the pace of change, the change in consumer consumption patterns, the improvement in technology, the only way that we can measure success is through the behavior change that we see in the people who consume the things that we make. But that change is difficult. It's so easy to say, manage to outcomes over outputs. But outcomes are fuzzy, right? The outputs are binary. You made the thing, you didn't make the thing, and I can reward you for that. And if you made more things, I can count how many more things you made than last time, right? Velocity, right? Oh, you've increased your velocity. You're making more stuff. Therefore, I should pay you more, right? But did anybody use that stuff? Did anybody even find it or look for it or get any value from it? Did anybody recommend our product because we made that stuff? Did they pay us more money? All of those things are behaviors that we're looking for. But the challenge is that it's difficult to manage to outcomes for a variety of reasons, right? First of all, it's fuzzy. If I ask you to increase retention or average order value, let's use average order value. You're a retail site, you're B2C commerce, right? And I say, look, Tony, your team's job is to increase average order value by 20%. Okay. That's an outcome. It's a behavior change. Yeah. Well, people buying slightly more stuff. And you come back to me after 3 months and you say, Jeff, we've been working on this and we've increased average order value by 12%. As your stakeholder, what do I do, right? Like, is that good? Is that bad? Should I be angry with you? Should I reward you, right? It's a much more difficult question. The other risk here is that when done correctly, right? If I assign you an and to be clear, a key result and an outcome are the same thing. So if we're talking about OKRs, objectives and key results, your key results should be outcomes, right? So if we set your goal and one of your key results is increase average order value, as your boss, as your stakeholder, I haven't told you what to make, right? Which is a fundamentally different way of managing than I'm used to, especially if I've been in leadership for a decade or more. Yeah. Right. And that makes managers anxious, right? Sure. If I don't tell the team what to do, right, what to make, what's my job all of a sudden? And so it's so much easier to default to the task list. We want to become the #1 e-commerce destination in all of Australia for online furniture sales by the end of the year. Okay, that's a nice objective. The key result is we'll ship our new mobile app by the end of Q1. We'll redesign the website by the end of Q2, and we'll start to offer these 3 brands by the end of Q3, right? All of that is output. All of those are features of our website, right? And they're easy to measure and they're easy to manage. Do any of those things indicate that we're the #1 online retail thing for furniture in Australia? They don't. Right. And so that's why this becomes really difficult. And that's why people revert. I work with teams all the time and I say, write me your first OKR. And the KRs are always features. And so I'll just wrap this very lengthy answer up by saying, when we see that, the question I always ask is, okay, great. That's an output. If we build that thing and it's the right thing to build and we do the best possible job that we can, building it, designing it, shipping it, et cetera, right? What will people be doing differently? And that's when we start to get to the outcomes conversation.
And I think so you and I were talking off air, whereas, some of the other internally terrible things I see is the velocity being an OKR, right, or a key result. And we're still the matching of velocity. So, that team over there should have the same velocity as this team, and that becomes a key result. and that becomes part of the objective, and that's not what this was ever meant for. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, look, velocity is really, it's really become a curse. You know, I think the intentions originally were good. If I'd like to believe that when that word was introduced and those concepts were introduced, and I think there's value in driving efficiency, but where velocity has, look, it's like all things agile, right? I think philosophically and in theory, they were filled with good intentions. And I think the sort of the bastardization of it happens in implementation, because what the majority of organizations hire agile processes for is productivity, efficiency, and velocity, right? And like make more stuff faster, make like deploy higher quality code faster is the goal. And again, what that fixates us on is output, is making more things. One of the things I've been crusading for a decade at this point is, okay, if we're going to talk, if we can't lose the word velocity, then I'm going to add velocity of learning into the process as well, right? Not just how much we're delivering, but how much we're learning. And the irony of that, of course, is that if we're working in fixed time boxes and sprints, and we're increasing the velocity of learning, then we are decreasing the velocity of delivery, right? Because it's a finite amount of time, it's a fixed number of people, and there's only so much work that can be done in that time frame. And so if we're going to introduce different activities, learning activities, then the other activities have to get lowered. So it's really a balance between velocity of delivery and velocity of learning. But that's, if we're stuck with it, that's the way I talk about it. But again, it's fixated on managing the output.
Yeah, I like that. Because if you're going to start the learning process and you make that part of the actual outcome or the key result, then that actually drives the whole continuous improvement mechanism. Speaking of that, the continuous improvement type thing, I know that you also have a thought around, there are product team OKRs and there are internally facing OKRs. I'd like to hear your thought on that, because, often I hear that, there's only one type of OKR. It's, Google used aspirational, and that's how it worked. But yeah, there is a differential.
So look, customer facing OKRs are relatively easy, relatively in the scheme of OKRs, in the sense that who the human is at the end of the value chain, and I hope what you want them to do with the product or service that you're making, right? There should be, my guess is most teams can make a series of pretty good guesses about what we want people to do with the thing that we're making for them, and we can define those as success criteria. It becomes a lot trickier, I think, for teams to think about this kind of on an internally facing point of view, right? So I make stuff that is consumed by other people inside the organization, APIs, platforms, those, technologically, it's relatively, it's easier, right? So you can, but again, the question becomes, okay, great, who am I making stuff for? And what will they be doing differently if the thing that I make for them is successful, right? And so one of the things that you want to consider for it, let's use a decent example here. A decent example could be the efficiency of software developers, right? So today we're writing a bunch of new APIs, right, to make the delivery of features faster and more efficient, so that our software engineers can call these APIs and get their features to market much more quickly than in the past, where they had to do it themselves or write one-off services or whatever it is, right? Terrific. Which APIs are we going to write? How are they going to work? What data are they going to provide? Right? These are all questions, design questions, right? These are architectural design questions. How will we know that worked well? Well, we want to see an increase in the number of calls to the API, an increase in the number of times these APIs are integrated into new customer-facing services, a reduction in the amount of manual services being written, right? Or whatever, something along those lines. These are all the behavior changes in the people who consume the thing that we make, right? So you can always think about it as, I make a thing for a human consumes it. If I do a good job, that human's behavior changes. The other, so that's kind of from a technical side of it. And by the way, I've completely exhausted my technical knowledge with that example. By the way, like that's the end of it. But let me give you another example, because let's talk about the non-technical side of things, right? The marketing, finance, legal, compliance, risk, HR, all these other functions that don't that aren't technical or product making. I was teaching a class to 150 telecom executives from all over the world a couple of years back, and I was explaining this concept. And this woman raised her hand. And she said, "Look, Jeff, I'm a lawyer, and I make cybersecurity policy for the organization. How does this apply to me?" Good question, right? I said, "Who do you make cybersecurity? Like, who do you give the cybersecurity policy to? Who reads it? Who has to sign it? Who has to agree to it?" She said, "Third-party vendors to the company." I said, "Oh, so you mean me?" Right? Like, I'm on stage teaching. I'm your customer, me and people like me, people who provide services and products to the company. She said, "Yeah, that's right." I said, "And how, if the cybersecurity policy works and I understand it and I follow it, what do you hope to see from me?" She says, "Well, I hope to see that you don't commit any cybersecurity violations." Okay. Behavior change, that we get you onboarded through our procurement process more quickly, behavior change, and that you're able to interact with our systems more efficiently without actually having to contact our tech support, which reduces our costs, behavior change, right? And I was like, hey, those are 3 outcomes that you can measure right now that measure how well your cybersecurity policy works, how well I understood it, how easy it was to consume. Right. And if you see me not behaving, me and people like me, right, other third-party vendors, not behaving this way, come talk to us. Oh, I had no idea that was in the cybersecurity policy. Well, because it's 1,000 pages long and written in lawyer language, and I never read it. I just agreed, and so I can get through procurement, right? And so when you walk people through this process, right, particularly internally facing teams, the light bulb goes on, but you have to walk them through it.
That's great. I thank you for clarifying it, because it's something that I hear and see and get asked quite often myself. So, selfishly, that helped me as well. I want to take a little bit turn to the right, so to speak, and touch on your books. So we talked about all those books before, but now what I want to talk about is your new book, which is Forever Employable. Okay. And I said to you previous to the break that, for me, when somebody writes something that's what I see as a give back, I'm always, take my hat off to them. And what I see with Forever Employable is that this book is really fashioned around enabling people to have a long career. So I'd love to hear about why you decided to write it and how it came about. And am I correct in that assumption, my riskiest assumption? I'm just testing it with you right now.
Yeah. Look, so for years, on a weekly basis, I've been getting inbound questions. Hey, Jeff, how did you get that speaking gig? How did you build your career? How did you get a book deal? And those questions come in on a regular basis. And at first I was answering them as one-offs. And then as the pull on the system, right? I was sensing, if we're going to use all the buzzwords from our world and our books, I was sensing the pull on the system that there was demand for this information. And I was responding in an inefficient way. I was responding with one-off questions. And I said, okay, maybe there's a way I'll write a Medium post about this, or a blog post about it. On top of all of that, I've got a good friend who I believe is very talented and very smart and articulate. And he's always, he's mid-career and he's always scrambling. Every time there's a layoff or a merger or something that's happening in his organization, he panics. He's like, oh crap, I got to update my CV and I got to get back on LinkedIn, and I got to, he's got to feed his family. I get it. I get the stress. I get the pressure. And for years, I've been telling him, I said, look, you need to start building an online brand, a presence for yourself. And so I decided to write this book to do that, to kind of share how I built my career, the business that I have today, along with examples from a lot of other folks as well. So like the backbone of the story is me on my path to becoming forever employable, and other folks who've done it along the way. Now, look, in the book, I talk about how it took me 15 years to do this. And I believe that today you can do it a whole lot faster than that. It still takes time. It still takes effort. I still think it takes years, but I don't think it needs to take 15. I think in 2 to 3 years, you can start to build that. But that's the goal. The goal is how to create a situation where you are an opportunity magnet, right? Where you are using your experience and your expertise to attract opportunities to you continuously, so that when the merger happens, when the layoffs happen, right, given what's happening in the world today, you're ready, because the opportunities are always inbound. There's always something that's coming your way, so that you don't panic, that you can move on to the next thing with comfort, that you're always sort of planning the next step. And to me, there's nothing more valuable than that peace of mind, right? That peace of mind that I am forever employable.
Yeah, as I read it, there were light bulbs going off in a couple of things for me as well. So, given the environment that we're in at this moment in time worldwide, not just here in Australia, but across, it's no news that at the moment, a lot of people are becoming unemployed. I think this is one of the most important books I've read for some time, and I'm not just saying that for fun. I think it's something that a lot of people should read. Unfortunately, we're very close to the end of our time, Jeff. And we could probably talk on for a lot longer, and I may have to have you back on the cast again to do that. If people want to get involved with you, if they want to read that book, or just touch base with you and have you involved with them, how can they do that?
The easiest way to get in touch with me, and it's by design, is jeffgothelf.com. Always easy to find me there. I blog there every week. New article, new short article every week. I've got a newsletter you can sign up for there as well. And then LinkedIn. LinkedIn is always a fantastic place to connect. I post there quite regularly, and I'm happy to connect with you there.
Brilliant. Look, Jeff, thank you for being on all the remote things. If you're listening to this and you enjoyed this, please like, subscribe, thumbs up, so that we can keep this thing running. If you really want to get involved with our remote community, so remoteaf.co, and then click the community button, you'll find a thriving community of people who are talking about remote, hybrid, how we do this, OKRs, strategy, all the interesting topics. So join us. We'd love to have you on there. Jeff Gothelf, thank you so much for being on today. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you.
My pleasure being here, Tony. Thanks so much for a great conversation.
Cheers.